everybody, it's the Alco Diesel guy with another review slash introduction, if you will. This is an Alco RS3 by Atlas, and it's not just any Alco RS3. It is the new edition, which is sound ready. Although as of the time I'm filming this, the sound version hasn't been released. I have these on pre-order. Now, before I go too much further into this, I'd like to go into the background of this locomotive. There have been several different generations that have come out. The first was built by Kato of Japan, essentially for Atlas, and this is one of those models. It's got a custom paint from this Mudan. I think that's a custom road name. I'm not familiar with this one. It could be a real one that someone did, but whatever the case, this is a custom painted one. As we note, it is one of those older models, as the couplers are in fact mounted right to the actual trucks themselves. And that unfortunately necessitates these massive pilot holes. Not very realistic, but back in the day, this was considered hardcore in terms of realism and very acceptable. The drivetrain, of course, is nonetheless very reliable and basically did set the world on fire. It was much more reliable than anything that had come out before, and I think to a certain extent since. The couplers are again the old school Rapidos, or C couplers, because again that's what was available in the time. So what we have here is a very well done locomotive, very reliable, but not DCC ready and not very capable beyond that. You could convert one of these, and I actually own one of those more recently that has been converted, but it's a real big pain. You have to put a plug in, which I think the, sort of as I call this, a pilot plug is available for these. The couplers have to get broken off and remounted elsewhere, or you have to replace them with Microtrains couplers. It's doable, but a pain. Now, underneath the hood of this locomotive is pretty interesting. If I can get this thing open, it's been a while. Under the hood of this locomotive, we find a chassis that looks a little bit too familiar with this sort of split board, as I call it, with one side of the board on one side and one side of the board on the other side, each with an LED light. And again, no place to mount the board in the center. This is a standard design that Kato used for a long time in locomotives, and Atlas, of course, picked up. They would eventually upgrade it to the split board, to the split frame, design, which allowed space for a board in the middle. That's what we generally look at as a DCC-ready locomotive for the longest time, although times have changed since that was considered acceptable. But this, however, always remained a generation behind. Those of you who think I'm bluffing, let me show you a slightly younger variation of this locomotive. This one came out sometime in the late 90s, mid to late 90s or so. Back when, I think I want to say this is the late 90s on this model, when DCC was in full swing. Now, you might have thought that this particular chassis would have been gotten rid of, or done away with, I should say. In reality, you'd be wrong. As I will demonstrate now, and I will disassemble this one on. So we take a look underneath the hood. It looks very familiar to the older chassis, pardon me. The main difference is the motor cutout has been changed, but it's still a split frame, it's still a split board design. It still has all the quirks of everything else, and essentially this stayed in service to Atlas's RS3 models for N scale, straight through until, I want to say, more recent times. I think in 2014 was the last run of these, if I remember correctly. Same exact chassis, no upgrades. You could do a DCC conversion with this, I should mention, with the CN type decoder from TCS. But again, that requires you to actually isolate this locomotive itself. And I think for a while they did market these as DCC ready, but stopped eventually on that, because technically it's not. It's DCC friendly, as you still have to isolate the motor to make it work correctly. And that's a really big, involved task to get done as is. I'm going to leave the shell off this for something I want to try with it later on. I'll keep this to the side. You'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. And that's one of the main features that's being noted on this particular new version from Atlas, and that it is in fact DCC ready. Now, whether they just did this again and just made it a little bit easier to put a decoder in, who knows? Or whether they completely redesigned the chassis and went with a type Next 18, or perhaps the E24, I believe that other socket is, we don't know. The only way I'm going to find out, of course, is to open this up. Now, most recently, I've had some quote-unquote fun with Atlas's new models. A lot of inconsistencies in their quality. Most recently, you can see my review on the Dash 8 model that I did. I found out the tank was actually far too low to the tracks. And in addition to that, there were issues with the gear shaft slash drivetrain being stripped down on one of those. I still have to take a look at that model, but I can't bring myself to do it because that engine got me so upset. I was really looking forward to it. So all I can do is hope that this is not going to be another downer. In reality, this is one of my favorite engines. Yes, I know my YouTube videos are rather critical of Alco for the way they push this engine out and for its design flaws, but the fact of the matter is I do like this engine. Part of the reason why I'm so harsh on them is the fact that they kind of destroyed an engine that could have been perfect had they not been so aggressive in trying to get those more powerful prime movers out without properly testing and going through all the foibles, etc., and making sure, and nicks and knacks, etc., and getting them to run reliably. Had they put a little more effort, or I should say time, into quality testing those locomotives, that would have probably dominated and still would be known as a much more popular engine than it was. Nonetheless, it did sell close to 2,000 engines, over 1,000 engines. It was one of their most popular sales locomotives ever. But still, would have been nice if they had just spent a little bit more time just honing their technology and making sure it worked. And yes, I know that there were a lot of railroads that had good luck with them. If you were lucky enough to get an engine built on the right day by the right person and quality tested by the right person, it would run well. But the only thing you could say about Alco's quality at the time was that it was consistently inconsistent, if you will. Anywho, without further ado, I've now pulled this from the box. I just can't stand waiting any longer. To start with first impressions, we see there are some similarities. Here is this CP rail locomotive from the previous run, and as you can see, it still has the wide frame underneath the actual horns. Same story here, so not much changed. I also note that this engine is, if I remember correctly, is supposed to have should have in real life at least had a steam generator. This version doesn't have it. Looking around the engine, the paint is very similar to what you would have seen. I'm not sure if these are the ones that were supposed to have 029 behind them. For a while, the New Haven Railroad had this weird quirk of having all of its locomotives have a 0 before its number, even if it was just 500. It was a really strange quirk that company had. Another unique note about this particular locomotive is that the horns, while they're normally not accurate for being in this location, one on the short hood, one on the long hood, they're actually accurate for this particular locomotive. The New Haven is one of the few railroads that ordered this dual horn setup. Most had a singular pod that kind of stuck on the top of the cab of the locomotive, which contained horns facing each direction for, again, two-way operations of this locomotive, as, again, this engine was meant to actually operate short cab forward for at least short-term uses to allow it to be more flexible as a switcher as well as a local locomotive. It's pretty simple. It's just orange, but not much in the way of details. That's how these engines were designed from the factory. I mean, I should say in real life as well. Where did I put my sponger? There it is. I don't want to use it. I don't like using a tweezer on this. Let's go knock this little front part off here. Sweep it away. There we go. I was looking at the nose. They do have the dimensions correct here. You note that the fireman's side of the cab is wider than the fireman's side of the cab is narrower than the engineer. This was done deliberately to give the engineer a little bit more vision going back. All that said, railings are in pretty good shape. Everything's in place. Usual Acumate couplers. Nothing much to be said about these things. Nothing much to be said too much about it now. Essentially, it looks very much like this model would have been, and I believe if this would be in production right now, a CP rail engine, that's exactly what it would look like on the outside. Let's take her completely apart now and see what this has to really show for itself. There it is. After wiggling, I got it up safely. I know a lot of people tell me there's a better way of doing this, but I do not trust snapping it, because I also heard that other tactic of hitting it against the case can actually also break the front of the locomotive off and cause you serious issues. So under the hood we have, and ooh, that's interesting. We have, in fact, a modern E24 style socket, it looks like. I'm going to have to put DCC on it because, again, this is DCC ready, not equipped. Before I do that, on the motors, it's again been completely revamped, it looks like, as well. It's a dual flywheel, but the second flywheel is a different color. Am I seeing that right? Oh, no, it's just a reflection, I think. Oh, no, it's got like... oh, I see. It's got like black tape on it. That's strange. I guess it's to help you see. I guess they balanced it really nicely. So this is going to be available, rather, it should be available soon, possibly even by the time this is out, with the ESU low sound decoder. And it looks like it just plugs right into the back of this here. This even has the speaker installed right over here for it. So I could literally upgrade this to DCC and sound by simply buying the appropriate decoder. In fact, I may already have one here. Whatever the case, I'm not looking to do that right now. What I want to do is get this thing in service. And to do that, I'm going to start by removing this decoder board. Before I go any further, actually, let me try one thing. This is something I've been trying to get done for a while. Would this old shell go on the new locomotive chassis? I should mention that one of the quirks on this older shell versus the slightly newer shell, as a few of these had different modifications on the sides here from the various different generations to stop them from being compatible, I assume. And I don't think this is going to let it happen. Let me try. So I am curious if this would fit. That would open the possibilities up for a lot of older locomotives to get a new life. Well, that side goes down. Does this? Yep. Aha! It does fit. Okay. So that's another positive to this. If you own an Atlas RS3, which I mentioned they were very difficult to convert, an earlier one that was quote-unquote DCC ready, but really just DCC friendly, this is an easy way of converting it. Buy one of these engines and swap the chassis. So now let me get my CP rail chassis off this thing. Pardon me, shell off this thing carefully. Oh, and I just found another quirk. These new Atlas engines, again, the quality control, I didn't even tug on this. It just fell right out. So it's another thing to be very careful with when you're disassembling it. I just touched this. I did not pull it. I promise you from it. I would not do something as reckless as that. Let me get this thing back on here. I don't know how that slipped out. May have not been in to begin with correctly, but it's in now. Let me go now and carefully remove my body again. So note to self, I won't be going into these to do much maintenance because it looks like they seem to share the unfortunate trait of the GP9, which is that the trucks themselves are not very well clipped in place and will probably wear out very quickly if this happens a lot. Okay, so without further ado, let's get this thing ready for DCC. Now, because it is this type of socket, I believe it's an E24, I'm going to proceed by first getting this board off here. And I think I might actually put the CP rail shell on this. Now I'm really excited because I have a bunch of older, or rather I do have a few older RS3s which I've been tempted to acquire but haven't. But with this kind of chassis, that definitely makes it worthwhile because now I can convert them accordingly. Let me put this right over here in my parts bin thing. Magnetic parts bin, don't want to lose it. So like with any E24, I should mention decoder install with the Atlas engines. You just undo the two screws as such, and the whole board can be lifted off. We're not going to remove this board. We're just going to take it completely from the locomotive. We're just taking it off the actual chassis so we can get to the decoder, which is located right here, which is actually a dummy board right now. So let me see here. Which way is this going to want to roll? This way. Don't want to strain the wires. There we go. This is the stock board, which is a dummy board. It's been taped in place, so it shows you how much faith I have in that socket to work. Over here we have a connection. Not sure what that's for. I've been wondering if this is actually going to be for like a keep alive setup right over here. I'm not sure what that's actually for here. That is not the speaker. The speaker is already connected up here. So I'm not sure what that's for here. I'm pretty sure, I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with keep alive for one of these because that's something that's been in a lot of demand. But there is an add-on connection here. Let's go now and actually cut this off, I think. I really don't want to use a knife on this. But then again, think about it, it's a dummy board. So if it does break, who cares? I'm not going to put it back in place. I guess I should have. I just realized I didn't even test this thing. I've been so excited to get it going. Ooh, I'm going to be very careful with this knife. Again, my usual disclaimers. Follow these videos. I'm learning as you we're learning together here, as I never had one of these before, so I don't know how to take it apart. Ooh, did I break any wires? No, thank goodness. Okay, good. Okay, so now with that, I have access to the dummy plug. Before I prove myself a dummy. Yeah, okay, I'll stop with the bad jokes. You can tell I'm off the night shift, can't you? I'm going to go ahead now and put my knife back there into the protective cover thing. I'm going to now take this off and see which this is. I believe that's an E24 socket. Now, I know I have one of these hanging around, at least I believe I do. Let me go see if I can dig one up. Found it. Didn't think I had one of these, but it turns out I have one of these left. Looks like I'm going to have to get more of them if I intend to do more of these conversions, especially. Well, there is a cheap sound decoder that Digitrax has made. I'm not sure if that does have the sound effects on it. Right now, I'm just going to keep things simple. I'm just going to put a simple decoder, a simple non-sound decoder in there. Again, I've now removed the E24 dummy plug. And again, just to show you what an E24 looks like, it's this particular, that's the particular code name I got. That's the part number right there. It's a low pilot. I had to dig around in my box for this because I bought them a while ago for the GP7 projects. Again, I'm going to put it right where the other one was. I'm not sure how well that footage came out for that. But essentially, this dummy plug was sitting right here. As such, right there. What we're going to do now is replace it with this decoder once I remove the tape on this. And just in case anyone's wondering, this is what a Next 18 socket decoder looks like, as opposed to an E24 socket. So very clearly, it is this type decoder. Let's now try one more time to get it in here. I don't understand why I'm having so many issues attaching this thing. It can only go that way, so it has to go this way. Ah, there it goes. It snapped in. Ugh, a little bit stressful, but it worked okay. So I'm going to turn her over again. Well, I'm going to make it turn over real and make it work, but okay, I'll stop with the bad jokes. Turn the board over, and I will now put those screws, which I placed inside my magnetic parts bin, back in this locomotive. And I think I'm going to have to go shopping for more E24s. That was my last one. Okay, second screw is in place. Don't over tighten, but you want to make sure they're tight. Oh God, and you don't want to screw into the PCB like I started to do there. Oh, my eyes are starting to fail me. I'm getting old. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm going to now test this, and hopefully I do not have a shower of sparks. But I'm told that this is foolproof. I tell you, foolproof. Well, we'll see. Okay, without further ado, let me get my newly decoder-equipped RS3 chassis on the tracks. And I think I'm actually going to put the CP rail on the top of that just to make things interesting. Maybe or not. I got to think about it. You know what? I'll just put the New Haven one on there for the time being. That is pretty cool. That will actually work with it. They made it adaptable to the Atlas, I should say, made it adaptable to the original and essentially compatible with the old school chassis. That opens up the possibility for several of these engines working. Okay, everybody, cross your fingers. Smoke test. I'm going to turn the power on to my DCC system, which is now plugged into the main track. It's up, and it started to move. Okay, good. That's fine because this thing always gives me power, always sets it with a throttle. Let's now try the lights. There's front, there's back. Lights on, lights off. Nice and smooth. Let's reverse it. Oh yeah, this is in pretty good shape. Move my solder on the corner. I don't know how that got there. Sorry, folks. I'm going to call that a good runner. That is smooth. A lot better than some of the engines I've more recently overhauled. Let me go now and program this thing up with the proper address on it. I think I'm going to assign this to 529. So let's go loco 52. Actually, no, I got to do something else. I got to go program. I got to go to the main track. So I got to go program. I'm going to go to the main track. Address 3, and let's go 529. Programmer up. No response. Okay, let's see if that actually worked. This has been acting up again, this DCC system. I'm going to probably end up changing it. Oh, it worked. Where it's not programming things for some strange reason, but this one worked. These newer decoders take less voltage to program, so they tend to work better. The older decoders do work, but you got to really have a lot of voltage to make them work correctly. This one seems okay. Alrighty, let me go now and put the shell back on her. And I guess I'm going to keep this one on here for the time being. You can always tell the cab where the cab goes. It's always by these two big block things here. Bolster thingies. So anyway, I just slip this right over and apply pressure until it slips in place, and there it is. So this looks like a very promising locomotive. I haven't done a review on this yet. I just wanted to test it and just give a little background on it. I'll probably use some of this footage for that, because unfortunately one of my locomotives bit the dust in the process of me doing this. When I took the shell off, the old dried out plastic on this RS3 gave up. So unfortunately this engine, RIP, is no longer going to be in service. Not that I actually used it ever before. I thought I was buying one with the closed pilots. Anyway, that's just a brief overview of this locomotive. I'll probably splice in some footage of this engine operating before I do a more thorough review. It is an E24 socket. A couple things I've learned, I should say. It is an E24 socket. It's very easy to equip with DCC. It has a speaker already installed, so you can put sound on it if you have a DCC and sound E24. And basically, it's a huge step forward for the RS3s from Atlas. So with this, I'm looking forward to getting my sound equip units, which will hopefully ship at some point. Because again, as I'm filming this in mid-October, I'm told they will ship at the end of October, although that's a generic date, because I notice whenever something is shipping from some of the retailers, they always say the end of the month, the last day of the month, and then they wind up changing it. Not sure why the sound version's been delayed. All I know is the DCC ready version is available, and definitely worth buying in my opinion. But anyway, one more thing. Did I have anything humps? Nope. And I will say also another thing I forgot to check, and it is, and I actually do note there are no extra pieces of flashing hanging off on the trucks, as were on the GP9s. I'm glad to see Atlas took care of that. Anyway, I'll hold it right there. This is getting kind of long. Along with this review, I hope everyone enjoyed this sort of brief overview of the new Atlas RS3. And yes, it is an E24. Again, is the resounding conclusion I've reached on this. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please like and subscribe. And as always, keep the metal side down. Strange.